Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we learn how to plot in Python. So there are several ways we can plot in Python, but the approach we are going to consider today is plotting using data points. So here we are going to have our set of data, that's X and Y data points, right? In order to plot using the programming language Python, there are several libraries we are going to use. Now, one of such libraries is Matplotlib. So we are going to consider Matplotlib as a toolbox, right? And inside that toolbox, there are several tools that you are going to need. So here we are going to call that toolbox from Matplotlib, right? Then we are going to call the tool. So Matplotlib is the toolbox, right? So then inside that toolbox, we are going to call the tool pyplot. So I'm going to say that from Matplotlib import pyplot, right? So we have pyplot. Now we don't want to be typing pyplot every time we want to use this tool. So you're going to import pyplot as, let's say, PLT, right? So PLT is not the shortcut for pyplot. Now it's left with our data sets, right? So now let's say that the X data set is giving us, so you're going to create a list for the X data points. So let's say we have 1, let's say 2, 3, let's say 4 and 5, right? Then let's assume that the Y data point is also giving us, let's say 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, right? So we have the X data points and the Y data points. So it's now time for us to plot these points. Now let's plot. So we are going to use the tool PLT, which stands for pyplots. Then, and inside the tool pyplot, there is a function called plot, right? So we're going to use this plot function to plot X and Y, right? Then let's label the axis, right? So you're going to use X label to label the X axis. Let's call the X label, say, X axis. So we have the X axis. Then we do same for the Y label, right? So you're going to label the Y axis as, let's say, Y axis. We can also give a title to our plot. So we're going to use the title function, right? Then let's call the title, say, my first plot in Python, right? So then it's now time for us to show the graph, right? So, and inside the tool PLT, we are going to use the function show. So then when we click on this run Python file icon, then our graph is going to show. So you're going to run the script, and here is our graph, right? So we have our graph giving us this. So we have the title, that's my first plot in Python, then the y-axis and the x-axis, right? And this is the graph. We can also invoke the grade, right? That's the lines in here. So in order to do that, you have to use the grade function. So let's say somewhere here, we are going to say that plt.grade, right? Then when you run this Python file, then it's going to show the grade, that's the lines. Let's try a second example. So with our second example, let's try plotting a scatter plot, right? Here also we need our data point. So the X data points, let's assume is to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. For the Y data points, let's assume is equal to 2, 5, 3, 8, 7, right? Also in pyplot, there is a function called scatter. So that's to plot a scatter diagram, right? So scatter, then you're going to plot X and Y. Now let's label the axis. So that'll be PLT dot, so X label. Now let's call the X axis, say, X axis. Then likewise the Y axis, let's call it, say, Y axis. So Y label, then you're going to call it, say, Y axis, right? Now we can also title the graph, right? So that'll be PLT dot, then you use the function title, right? Now let's call the title, say, my first scatter plot in Python, right? Then it's now time for us to show the graph. So that'll be plc.show. Then you click on run Python file. Then you have your scatter plot. So this is the scatter plot for the data points. Thank you for watching. See you guys in the next video.